Hello everybody, welcome to a new tutorial from Sound for More. It's Leo speaking. Today I have the pleasure to start a new series of tutorials on SQSL Latch. Before I continue, I would like to remind my viewers to subscribe as it helps with growing the channel. Thank you very much. So what is SQSL Latch? Well, it's a conceptual MIDI controller as per description of the app, but it is really a MIDI sequencer which has been created to drive drones, soundscape type of synth or apps. It's not an AUV3 compliant app, and I know I might hear some of you saying, oh, that's not great, but actually it doesn't really matter, because what is important is the workflow that it allows you to actually have in terms of creating those soundscapes using different apps. Therefore, as you can see now on the screen, it is running as a standalone app. It is a MIDI sequencer, and after all, a creative one, I would say, not a traditional one, and therefore it doesn't produce any sound, so you need to have something running in the background which allows you to produce sounds. Now, this is the first tutorial, so I'm going to introduce it to you. And therefore, I'm going to use something very simple, like in this case, Module Pro from Korg. You might be thinking, okay, that's not really a great app to do drones or soundscape. And that's right. And I will show you an example of how to create some of those composition and music genre later on. But I'm going to use a simple piano because that is the best way to actually learn how it works. So first thing you need to do is, in this case, of course, I'm using Korg Module Pro, but you might be using something else, and that is absolutely fine. I'm going to check that under MIDI channel is receiving as Omni, so it's receiving through all different channels. So that is important. Later on, we will use different channels, and we will use application inside AUM as well, driven by SQSL Latch. But that is a more complex setup, which I will show you in a couple of more tutorials. Okay, as you can see, this is the main screen of SQSL Latch. At the top here, you might have a different description depending on if you used it before. At the moment, it's saying scale C minor, channel number 1, session 1, and velocity 55. Now, the velocity is set here. You can move up and down. You can see that it's changing. So from these type of dials here. Then it says channel number 1 here, which correspond to this channel here where it says letter or groups. A is channel number 1, B is channel number 2, and you can see it changes colors as well. C is channel number 3, etc., etc. And you have additional, you have access to additional groups. If you click on the bank here, bank 2, it starts to go from I, L, etc. And you see the channel becomes channel number 9. Okay, then it says scale C minor and session 1. So C minor, the scale which is associated to all these pads that you see in these metrics on the screen, and session 1 is your connectivity from a MIDI perspective. So let's change that connectivity first of all. You see here on the left hand side the number of buttons. Okay, the top one is clear, which stop all the notes, clear also what is being contained in this particular group called A, for which is associated to channel number 1 for now. Okay, so the second button is setup. Then you have CC control, modulation, band, volume, notes, and the bank, which I just mentioned a moment ago. So let's go to setup, and you can see the screen has changed now, and by default it has selected output here. Okay, and you can see there are 3 outputs, and it shows you the output at the top. So the first one which is selected is session 1. If we click on the second one, we have a module, and the third one, Latch virtual output. So let's connect it to the module 1, which is where the connectivity will happen with Korg Module Pro. Now, to exit this setup menu, click again on setup. Now, if you press some of the pads on the screen, you hear some notes. Now, it's important to understand that when you click on a pad, you send a message of MIDI note on, and that will stay on until you deactivate the pad. And when you deactivate that pad, it will send a message of MIDI note off. That's very important to remember, because otherwise you will get into a situation which, as I will show you in a moment, are a little bit confusing. Now, at the bottom left here, you have a symbol here, which is for recording, and I will show you how it works in a second. When you finish recording, it will change to a play button. Next, you have this lock symbol, and I suggest to start with that you activate it, because it will stop randomization of notes that you recorded in the particular group. Then next here, you have two arrows, one going up and one going down. If you click the one going down, you see it's changing on the left-hand side here, the position on an octave, and then of course you can go up. Okay? So let's test again the pads to see that they're working. Okay, perfect. Let me show you how you record. So you click on the button here, record, and then you press some notes, right? So let's try. If I stop that now, without turning off the note, you can see nothing happens. In reality, it's already playing the loop that has been recorded. But because the notes are already selected, it's pressing effectively a key or sending notes or messages to Module Pro for notes which are already on. And they're going through that ADSR cycle. So that is why it's not working. Indeed, if I deactivate the pads, you will see it will play them. Right? And that's because, of course, I have not recorded note of messages. So let me stop it from play. I click here, and then I deactivate the notes there as well. Now, if I press it, I press this button again to play, it will play the notes, but of course it will stop because it will never turn off those notes. The other thing you can also see is on the group up here, group A, you can see also 3 notes which correspond to the 3 notes which have been recorded. Now let's deactivate the playing and let's click the clear button here, and it will clear the notes recorded, and you can see the symbol here on the bottom left has changed to actually a recording button again. One thing I also haven't mentioned yet is that the scale selected is C minor. In order to change that, you go to Setup and then you click on Scale. And then here is where you can change your scale. So number 12 is chromatic. This pad here is major. Next one is minor, and so on and so forth. Of course, you can change the pads up here as well to change to the one you like. I'll leave it to C minor for now. The other thing I wanted to show you is that you have a channel setting here. Here it shows you for each of the group which MIDI channel they are assigned to. So the first one is MIDI channel number 1, the second one is 2, 3, etc., etc. And if I click on bank 2, you can see it gives me the other 8 groups which are configured by default to start from MIDI channel number 9 to 16. Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's exit the setup again and let me show you how to properly record. So I click record, then I press some notes, and I also will deactivate them as well. Okay, let me try. Okay, let's stop that from playing. So hopefully that makes sense. Now let's say that you want to record a new group. Fine, let's click on the second one, B. Let's click record and press some notes. Actually, before we do that, let's clear this. Let's activate the lock. Otherwise, it will randomize notes, and I will show you that in a sec. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense, and of course if you have different instruments in different channels, it will start to get very, very interesting. Now let's play them together. Okay, we stopped now. Let me show you what happens when you don't have the lock symbol on. And indeed, let me play first with the symbol on, and then I'm going to show you what it happens when I turn it off. So it has played this note in sequence, this one, this one, and this one as well. Okay, now let's turn this off and see what happens. Okay, so it is randomizing the sequence in which it plays the different notes. Now, let me show you what happens if I activate it after it finished playing a sequence. Let me show you. Okay, I activated it now, and let's try. So as you can see, it's not going to revert back to the original sequence. It's going to play again the last sequence that it has generated. So it's locking the last sequence which is being generated. And of course, that can be useful, and sometimes that can be also annoying depending on what you actually want to do or what you are trying to record. But hopefully that makes sense so far in terms of what it does. Okay, I'm going to stop here for this first tutorial. In the next one, we are going to show you a setup with multiple instruments using AUM, and we're going into how to create modulation, bend and pitch changing, etc., etc. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Bye.